Don't you dare touch that grave. Evelyn's voice cracked through the cold air, but the janitor didn't stop. The little girl just whispered, "Grandpa, she looks like her." Before we dive into this story, I need to know something. Would you forgive someone who showed up too late, years too late, to say, "I'm sorry"? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever felt like love was worth fighting for, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The morning light cut through the mist like an apology no one had the courage to give. Evelyn Cross sat in the back of her black Escalade, staring out at the rows of headstones sliding by like ghosts of other people's stories. The chauffeur said nothing. He knew the ritual. Every year, same day, same silence. 5 minutes, she muttered. Her voice was sharp, tired, expensive. She adjusted her gloves even though it wasn't cold enough to need them. The leather had become a shield, another layer between her and the world she once wanted to save. The cemetery was quiet, except for the sound of a leaf blower somewhere in the distance. She hated that sound. It felt too alive for a place meant for stillness. As she stepped out, her heels sank into the damp grass. The earth gave way slightly, like it remembered her from last year and wasn't sure it wanted her back. The marble headstone gleamed even in the pale light. Amelia Cross, beloved daughter. 1999-2021. The light she left will not fade. Evelyn crouched. Her reflection shimmered faintly across the stone's polished surface. "Liar," she whispered. Her driver stood a respectful distance away, eyes fixed on his phone. She liked that distance, kept things contained. She placed a bouquet of white lilies down, then another of peonies, her daughter's favorite, though she'd never been sure if Amelia still liked them before the accident. For a moment, she just stood there, hands clasped, eyes dry. Grief had long ago calcified into ritual. Then she heard it, a muffled sob somewhere to her left. She turned. At first, she saw only movement. A man kneeling a few rows down, his back bent, his shoulders trembling. Next to him, a little girl held a wilted sunflower. The man's work jacket said, "Fairhaven Maintenance." Evelyn froze. The sound of his quiet crying felt too personal, too raw for a place where she came to keep her pain orderly. "What's he doing here?" she muttered, voice clipped. "This isn't." The girl turned, her eyes wide, unguarded. And for a second, Evelyn's heart stuttered. The child looked eerily like Amelia. Same freckles scattered like constellations across her cheeks. That's when Evelyn's hand trembled. She backed away, heels digging into the soil. Her driver looked up, startled. "Ma'am." She didn't answer. Her pulse hammered in her ears. All she could see was the sunflower, drooping over the grave. Whose grave was it? 2 days earlier, Evelyn had been in New York, surrounded by glass and chrome. A charity gala, cameras flashing, someone telling her she looked radiant. She'd smiled the way she always did, efficient, rehearsed. But that night, alone in her penthouse, she'd opened her daughter's old Instagram. The last post was still there. Amelia, laughing at a diner, coffee mug in hand. The caption, "She still thinks I'll come home for Christmas." She'd stared at it until the screen dimmed. So when she'd flown back to Fairhaven, it wasn't about ritual anymore. It was something else, an ache that refused to stay quiet. Now, in the quiet of the cemetery, the ache had a sound. A janitor crying. "Excuse me," she said sharply, voice cold to hide the tremor. "You can do your work later. This section's reserved today." The man looked up. His face was rough, lined by labor and loss. "I'm not workin'," he said softly. His voice carried a Midwestern drawl, gentle but steady. "Just visiting." "Visiting?" He nodded toward the grave in front of him. A small marker, hand-carved, imperfect. The letters read, Elena Ruiz. 2016-2023. Loved beyond words. Evelyn blinked. The world tilted slightly. "She's my granddaughter," he said quietly, noticing her confusion. "Was?" The little girl squeezed his hand. "We bring her flowers," she said. "Mom says the sun helps her smile." Evelyn's throat tightened. Mom says. But there was no mother. The child's eyes were too knowing for 6. She wanted to leave, to retreat to the comfort of detachment. But something about that sunflower, something about that grief, pinned her there. The janitor looked at her again. You okay, ma'am? She almost laughed. No one had asked her that in years. Not really. I'm fine, she lied. Just paying respects. He nodded, wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. Then I guess we're both doing the same thing. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her hotel room, the sound of rain tapping against the window. She couldn't shake the image of the little girl. Lila, the janitor had said before they left. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Press wants confirmation you'll be at the conference tomorrow. Should I confirm? Evelyn typed, no. Change of plans. Then deleted it. Then typed it again. She poured herself a glass of wine and whispered to no one. Why was he crying at her grave? And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice answered. Because grief doesn't care who you are. But neither of them knew. This was only the beginning. The air felt thinner now, colder somehow, as Evelyn stood in the cemetery that afternoon. The sun was high, but it didn't seem to reach her. Her shadow stretched out across the graveyard, long and empty. She'd never believed in fate. Not the kind people talked about anyway. The kind that made you think everything had a reason. But standing there, looking at Lila's small figure holding that wilted sunflower, something began to shift in her chest. What was she doing here? The thought came like a slap. She didn't know why she stayed. She didn't know why she kept watching the man and the little girl, sitting so quietly by that gravestone. She didn't know what pulled her. But there it was. Is that your daughter? Evelyn finally asked, her voice softer now, barely above a whisper. Daniel looked up, the lines on his face deepening with a sadness she couldn't place. He hesitated for a moment, like he was deciding whether to speak or not. No, he said slowly. She's my granddaughter. Elena was my daughter's girl. His words felt like a puzzle, incomplete, but they made Evelyn's chest tighten. She nodded, her throat dry. She glanced at the stone again. Elena Ruiz, loved beyond words. He wiped his eyes again, his expression guarded, like he was holding something back. But then his gaze softened when he looked down at Lila, who was now carefully placing the sunflower against the stone, as if she were trying to make it smile again. She died 2 months ago, he added quietly. Car accident. My daughter, Evelyn's mind went still, the world quiet around her. 2 months. The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. She was a teacher, Daniel continued, his voice wavering. A good one. A lot of people loved her. But she was just trying to make the rent when He stopped. His hand gripped the front of his coat, knuckles white. Sorry. It's still fresh. Evelyn felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Not pity, not sympathy. Maybe it was empathy, a rare thing she hadn't felt in years. Not since her daughter's death. And suddenly, it hit her. His pain wasn't so different from hers. Lila turned her head and caught Evelyn staring. Her eyes were wide and unafraid, almost too wise for her age. Who are you? She asked softly, not like a child asking a stranger's name, but more like someone recognizing something deep within. Evelyn blinked, unsure how to answer. Her voice faltered. I'm just someone passing through, she said. It was a lie, but it felt safe. Lila nodded, accepting the answer as if it made sense. She went back to her task, arranging the sunflower like it was the most important thing in the world. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Evelyn and his granddaughter. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, ma'am, he said, his voice thick with exhaustion. I come here every week, just to talk to her. I know it might seem strange, but… No, Evelyn interrupted. Her voice was steady. It's not strange. I understand. There was a long silence, the kind that you couldn't fill with words. Evelyn wasn't sure why, but she found herself sitting beside Daniel. The ground was cold, the grass wet beneath her, but it didn't matter. She had 1,000 things she could be doing, a million phone calls waiting. But all she wanted to do right now was sit there. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt like she wasn't alone. Daniel didn't ask why Evelyn was there. He didn't push for details. It was as if he knew, instinctively, that she wasn't ready to share yet. Lila was still humming, picking tiny pebbles off the ground and placing them in her pocket like they were treasure. She had the kind of energy that made Evelyn feel tired just watching her. There was a softness to her, a purity that Evelyn hadn't felt since her own daughter was a little girl. Suddenly, Lila turned, her tiny hand reaching up. "You're sad, too, aren't you?" Her voice was soft, a question more than a statement. Evelyn froze. She hadn't expected that. How could a child, this small, know anything about sadness? Before Evelyn could respond, Daniel spoke, his voice thick with an emotion Evelyn couldn't name. "She's always asking about people who are sad," he said, his gaze dropping to Lila with a tenderness that broke through his tough exterior. "She says they need company." Evelyn watched him closely. There was a weariness to him that came from carrying too much too long. "You lost someone too," Daniel continued, glancing at Evelyn, almost knowingly. "Didn't you?" For the first time in a long while, Evelyn couldn't hide it anymore. She wasn't sure why, but something in Daniel's eyes made her want to let down the walls she had built so carefully over the years. She wanted to answer him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded, just once. And in that one small movement, the dam inside her cracked open. The memories flooded back. Of her daughter Amelia, of all the things she hadn't said, the words left unspoken, the time lost. Her hand trembled as she wiped away a tear that had escaped, unnoticed by anyone but herself. For a moment, Evelyn didn't know who she was anymore. The woman who built an empire, who had everything, who had nothing. She was just another person in this vast, strange world, caught in the same web of loss. Lila was the first to break the silence. She tugged at Daniel's sleeve, her small fingers wrapping around the fabric. "Grandpa, I think she needs a hug," she said, looking up at him with the seriousness of a child who believed she had all the answers. Daniel gave a small, dry laugh, then turned to Evelyn. "You hear that? She says you need a hug." Evelyn opened her mouth to decline, to pull back into herself, but then she stopped. The weight of the years of grief she'd carried alone started to feel unbearable. Maybe it was the way Daniel looked at her, or the way Lila's innocence pierced through her carefully constructed barriers. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop pretending. And so, without thinking, without words, Evelyn let herself lean forward. The hug wasn't perfect. It was awkward, unexpected, but when she wrapped her arms around Lila, she felt something shift inside her. Something she hadn't felt in years. It was warmth, and it was more than just physical. But Evelyn didn't know yet. The real test was just beginning. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the cemetery as Evelyn stood up from the grave, wiping her hands against the dark wool of her coat. She felt heavier than she had all morning, but in a way it was a relief. The brief connection with Daniel and Lila had left her unsettled, but also strangely lighter. But that feeling didn't last. The next day, she was back in her hotel room in Fairhaven, sitting at a desk stacked with papers. The screen in front of her blinked with notifications, emails from assistants, financial reports, people trying to pull her back into the life she had spent decades building. The corporate world called to her like it always did, demanding, overwhelming, familiar. She stared at her phone for a long time. The group chat with her board of directors glowed on the screen. Ready to close the deal? A few updates needed ASAP. It was the life she had chosen, wasn't it? The life that kept her from feeling things, from feeling this. Her mind kept drifting back to Daniel, to Lila, and she hated herself for it. It was as if they had shown her a different kind of life, one that didn't involve polished marble floors or multi-million-dollar meetings. And that was dangerous. She had come to Fairhaven for the first time in years to attend the anniversary memorial of Amelia's death. It was supposed to be a simple visit, a few minutes of silence at the grave, a clean break from everything she avoided. But now it felt more like a wound had been opened, raw and aching. I should just leave, Evelyn thought, reaching for her phone again. Go back to New York. Back to the clean, predictable life I built for myself. But something stopped her. She knew that if she went back now, she'd never face what had happened here. The following day, Evelyn was back at the cemetery. She didn't know why. She hadn't planned to return, but something about the place tugged at her. Felt different this time. The graveyard was still quiet, and the cold was creeping in with the first signs of fall. But as Evelyn walked down the rows of stones, she felt like a stranger to her own life. What was she doing here? The question echoed in her head, and she couldn't answer. She knew she was avoiding the truth, the reality that had followed her here. Her hand brushed against the iron gate that led into the cemetery, and she stopped, staring at the row of old headstones. Her mind shifted back to the earlier encounter with Daniel. She had dismissed it all too easily yesterday. His grief, the bond between him and Lila. She had told herself she wasn't like them. She couldn't be. The janitor had lost so much. The daughter he loved. A granddaughter whose future was uncertain. Yet here he was, surviving, not just surviving, but still showing up at the cemetery every week, still honoring his loved ones. Evelyn clenched her fists. She didn't want to feel this. It was a weakness she didn't recognize, and worse, it was a weakness that she didn't know how to control. The next time she saw Daniel, she had no idea what to say. He was there again, cleaning a few yards down from Amelia's grave. He didn't seem to notice her at first. He was lost in his own world, his back turned to her as he cleaned the area. Evelyn hesitated, but then her legs carried her closer. She tried to convince herself she wasn't doing it to make some kind of connection, but deep down, she knew she was. "Mr. Ruiz," she said. Her voice was too sharp, even though she didn't mean for it to be. "What are you doing here again?" Daniel turned, his face unreadable. The lines around his eyes softened when he saw her, but there was no smile. "I told you, ma'am. I come every week. I don't mean no harm." His voice was steady, but there was something in his tone, something deeper that Evelyn couldn't quite read. For a moment, she stood there, not knowing what to say. Her throat closed, her thoughts running wild. She wanted to be somewhere else, wanted to ignore the way he made her feel so vulnerable. I thought I could help you," she said after a long pause, feeling the words leave her mouth without permission. She felt foolish, embarrassed. Help? What was she talking about? Daniel raised an eyebrow, but he didn't press. He simply nodded, looking back at the grave he'd been tending to. "Help me?" He chuckled softly, but it wasn't a laugh. It was a sigh. "I don't need help, ma'am. Not anymore." He paused, then added, "I just come here to talk to Elena. That's all." Evelyn took a step back, unsure of what to say. She had expected something else, some way to make things right with him, some kind of explanation. Instead, the more she tried to control the situation, the more she realized she couldn't. Her instincts had always told her to take charge, to find the solution. But here, with Daniel, with Lila, she had no answers. And that scared her more than anything. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The hotel room was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioner. She tossed and turned in bed, restless, her thoughts consumed by Daniel's words. Not anymore. She had spent so long building walls around herself. Walls that were meant to keep her safe, walls that were meant to protect her from the pain she didn't want to face. But now, standing in the cemetery, she realized something. The walls she had built had only isolated her. They had only kept her from feeling anything, from experiencing what it was like to connect with another person again. She grabbed her phone and pulled up her messages. Her assistant had sent a few texts, updating her on the latest deals. But Evelyn didn't respond. She couldn't. Instead, she found the text from her sister. "Are you coming home? We miss you. It's been years." For a long time, Evelyn stared at the message. Home. She hadn't been home in so long. Not since Amelia's death. Not since everything had fallen apart. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to think about it. About what she had lost. And what she was still losing every day. But Evelyn wasn't ready to face that yet. And neither was Daniel. But fate, it seemed, was going to force them to. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Evelyn didn't know what made her return to the cemetery that day, but she found herself standing in front of Amelia's grave again, her fingers tracing the smooth stone. She hadn't expected to see Daniel. But there he was, sitting on the grass, his back to the sun, staring out at the horizon. Lila was beside him, her legs folded beneath her, coloring in a small sketchbook with crayons. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, feeling that familiar tightness in her chest. She almost turned to leave, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, kept her rooted to the spot. Daniel turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. There was no surprise, no harshness in his gaze, just quiet acknowledgement. "You've come back," he said quietly, as though he'd been waiting for her. "I thought you'd left." Evelyn didn't know how to answer. The words felt stuck in her throat. I don't know what I'm doing here," she finally said. Her voice was thin, unsure. "I didn't plan to come back. You don't need a reason," Daniel interrupted, his voice steady. "Some things just pull us back. And I get that." Evelyn glanced at Lila, who had paused in her drawing to look at Evelyn with those wide, curious eyes. For a moment, it was as if the world had narrowed down to this one small space. The three of them, caught together, with nothing else between them but a shared moment of quiet grief. "Do you ever get tired of coming here?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know why she asked it, but the question seemed to be lingering between them, unspoken for too long. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up and walked over to her, his boots crunching in the grass. There was something in the way he moved that made Evelyn realize how much weight he carried. Not just in his body, but in his soul. "I don't get tired," he said slowly, his eyes following Lila as she went back to coloring. "But sometimes I wish I didn't have to. I wish it wasn't like this. I wish I could have saved her. I wish I could have done more." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Done more. How many times had she thought those exact words when she thought about Amelia? How many nights had she stayed awake, imagining a different version of the world where she had been more present, more there? Lila's voice broke through her thoughts. "Grandpa, can I go play with the swings now?" Daniel smiled at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling, and nodded. "Go ahead, baby. Just don't wander too far." Lila jumped up and ran off toward the swing set nearby, her laughter light and free. Daniel watched her for a moment, his eyes softening. "She's the reason I keep coming back," he said quietly, more to himself than to Evelyn. "She's all I have left." Evelyn swallowed hard. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stir deep inside her. A feeling she couldn't name. She couldn't tell if it was pity or understanding or something else entirely, but it pulled at her, reminding her of the space in her own life that had been left empty by Amelia's absence. Evelyn stood there, silent for a moment, then found herself sitting down beside him. It wasn't something she had planned, but it felt right in a way she couldn't explain. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar, like two people who had been broken by life but weren't quite ready to give up on it yet. They didn't speak for a long time, just watched as Lila swung back and forth, the creak of the chains echoing in the stillness. "You know," Evelyn said after a while, her voice a little shaky, "I used to come to this place a lot when I was a kid. My family, we used to live around here. I come with my mom. She was always so good at staying in touch with people. With me." Daniel nodded, his gaze never leaving Lila. "Sounds like she was a good woman." Evelyn's chest tightened, but she forced herself to keep going. "She was. But when I grew older, I started to pull away. I thought I had to focus on more important things. Work, success. And after Amelia was born, I thought I could do both. I thought I could have it all." She laughed bitterly. "But I was wrong. I lost her, and I lost myself in the process." Daniel glanced at her, his expression softened. "I'm sorry you went through that. I really am." Evelyn felt the sting of unshed tears. She didn't want to cry in front of him, didn't want to show weakness. But something about his words made it impossible to hold back. "I never got to say goodbye," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never got to make it right. Not before it was too late." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to push the pain back down. It didn't work. It never worked. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment, but then he slowly placed a hand on her shoulder. A gesture so simple, yet so tender, that Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her that she hadn't felt in years. "I don't have all the answers, ma'am," he said softly. "But I think you did what you could, and maybe that's all we can do. Sometimes it's just about showing up, even when it feels too late." Evelyn took a shaky breath. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but the way he said it made her want to. For the first time since she'd come here, Evelyn felt a flicker of something like hope. Like maybe, just maybe, there could be a way forward. But how? She wasn't sure. She glanced at Lila, who had stopped swinging and was now watching them both. Her small face was filled with something beyond innocence. Understanding, maybe, or something older. It was almost like she knew that they were on the edge of something neither of them could control or fix. It was the same kind of quiet that had surrounded Amelia's grave. But even as Evelyn began to feel the smallest shift, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was about to change. Something big. And neither she nor Daniel could stop it. The week passed quickly, but for Evelyn, it felt like the world had slowed down. Each day, she found herself returning to the cemetery. Not out of duty, but because it was the one place she felt something real. Something that wasn't tied to work, or the sharp emptiness that had defined her life for years. Daniel had become a fixture in her days, a quiet presence she couldn't explain. And yet, every time they spoke, something in her shifted. At first, it was subtle. His small gestures of kindness, his unspoken understanding, the way he seemed to accept the grief she couldn't share with anyone else. But as the days wore on, the connection between them deepened, like the pulling of threads in a forgotten tapestry. That afternoon, Evelyn found herself sitting on the same bench where she and Daniel had shared that uncomfortable silence only a week ago. Lila was running around, laughing and playing, oblivious to the world of adult complexities. It was just the two of them now, surrounded by the quiet hum of nature. "Do you ever wish it could be different?" Evelyn asked, her voice quiet as she watched Lila play. Daniel sat beside her, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze distant. His usual calm had cracked, revealing something deeper beneath. A sadness, a burden he hadn't spoken about yet. "I used to wish it could be different," he said, his voice rough. "But after all these years, I've learned that life doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you need. And sometimes that means letting go of what you think you deserve." Evelyn turned to look at him, her heart aching with something that she couldn't name. She knew what he meant. She'd spent so many years holding on to the past, clinging to what could have been, that she hadn't realized she was suffocating under it all. She didn't even know what she was letting go of anymore. A gust of wind stirred the leaves around them, and Evelyn pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. There was an uncomfortable shift in the air. Something between them was changing. She could feel it, like the beginning of a storm. Daniel seemed to sense it too. His jaw clenched as he turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. There was a vulnerability in his expression that she had never seen before. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice low. "You think this place, this life, is all about the future. But for me, it's about the past. It's about Elena and Lila, and everything I didn't say, everything I didn't do." Evelyn's stomach tightened. She had no idea where this was going, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. "I'm not proud of the way I've lived," Daniel continued, his words coming out in a rush now. "I've spent so much time in this place, trying to make sense of the things I can't change. And you come in here with your fancy clothes, your high-rise office, acting like you have it all together." He stopped, taking a sharp breath. "I'm sorry," he added quickly. "I didn't mean to say that, but the damage was done." Evelyn recoiled, the sting of his words hitting her harder than she wanted to admit. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, but her throat tightened, and no words came. He had hit a nerve. Deep down, Evelyn knew it was true. She had spent so much time running away from her own grief, from the hollow emptiness of her heart, that she had forgotten what it was like to feel real emotions. And in that moment, all her polished armor, her perfect life, her business empire, her control over everything, felt like a distant illusion. "Maybe you're right," she whispered, the weight of her own guilt settling over her like a blanket. "I do run from it. I've been running for a long time. But I didn't mean to." Daniel didn't interrupt. He just looked at her. His expression softened, and Evelyn could see the unspoken understanding in his eyes. He didn't need her to explain herself. He already knew. Silence lingered between them for what felt like an eternity. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter now, but with a rawness that Evelyn hadn't expected. "I never told you why I come here every week," he said. His eyes seemed distant, like he was looking at something far beyond the cemetery. Evelyn turned toward him, her heart beating a little faster. She hadn't realized until now how little she actually knew about him. About the man behind the quiet grief, the one who came here to honor a past he couldn't change. "I come here," he continued, his voice breaking slightly, "because every time I look at that grave, I see the mistakes I made. I wasn't there when Elena needed me the most. I wasn't there when she died." Evelyn felt her throat close. The rawness of his words, the weight of that unspoken guilt, felt suffocating. He continued, voice trembling now. "I thought I had more time. I thought I could fix things, but it was too late." Evelyn's chest tightened. Her mind flashed to Amelia's face, to the countless moments she wished she could take back. All the things she hadn't said, the years she had lost. She couldn't breathe. "I should have been a better father," Daniel added, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I should have done more for her. I should have been there for my daughter when she needed me." Evelyn swallowed hard, her heart breaking for him. She couldn't imagine the pain of losing a child, but she understood loss in ways she didn't have the words for. And then, as if everything in her life had been leading to this moment, Evelyn found herself speaking before she even realized what she was saying. "I should have been there for Amelia," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have been better. I should have known what she needed." The air between them shifted. For the first time, they were no longer two people lost in their grief. They were two people sharing it. Their pain, their regret, their longing for what could have been. The silence that followed was deep and heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was a shared understanding. Lila ran back over to them, her small face glowing with innocence and light, pulling Evelyn and Daniel out of their moment of raw vulnerability. "Grandpa, I made this for you," she said, holding out a picture she had drawn. A simple image of a house, a sun, and two stick figures holding hands. One of the figures had a small crown on its head. Daniel smiled through the tears that were beginning to form. He took the drawing, his hands shaking as he pressed it to his chest. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Evelyn watched the scene unfold, feeling the weight of their shared grief settle around her, mingling with something else, something that felt like a beginning. But Evelyn knew they hadn't yet faced the hardest part. There were things they still hadn't said, things that were going to change everything. The days after the cemetery conversation had passed in a blur of quiet tension. Daniel was there every morning, keeping to his routine, taking care of the graves, and showing up for Lila. Evelyn came back too, drawn to something she couldn't define. But the distance between them, the quiet that filled the space when they were together, was thick with unsaid things. Each time she saw him, she wanted to say something, to break the silence, to bridge the gap. But the words wouldn't come. They both seemed trapped in their own worlds, afraid to cross into each other's pain. It was one chilly evening when everything finally broke. Evelyn had returned to the cemetery for the third day in a row, her mind heavy with a decision she had been avoiding. She'd gotten an offer to sell the company, a life-changing amount of money that would set her free from everything she hated about her life. It was exactly what she'd dreamed of, wasn't it? But it felt hollow, like a promise that wouldn't come true. She parked her car at the entrance and stepped out into the quiet. It was getting darker earlier now, the long shadows stretching across the grass as the sun sank low. Daniel was there, of course. He always was. His back was to her, his hands busy as he cleaned a nearby gravestone. Lila was off somewhere in the distance, playing with a stray puppy she had found, her laughter echoing in the cold air. The scene was serene, peaceful even, but the unease that had been growing inside Evelyn flared up again. She walked up to him slowly, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. When he turned to greet her, there was no smile, no warmth in his eyes. "Daniel," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I need to talk to you." He wiped his hands on his pants and stepped back, his posture tense. "What is it?" She hesitated, but only for a second. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. I'm not fine." The words rushed out of her before she could stop them. It wasn't just about what she had said before, the guilt, the regrets, the pain of losing Amelia. This was something deeper. It was about the life she had built and the life she was now afraid to lose. Daniel didn't say anything right away. He only nodded, his gaze distant. It was as if he already knew what she was going to say. "I'm being offered a deal," she continued, her voice trembling, but she forced herself to go on. "A chance to sell my company. It's everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed for." Her heart pounded as the words came out. She wasn't sure why she was telling him this. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, she wanted someone to understand. To see her for who she really was, not the cold, calculated businesswoman she had become. Daniel finally spoke, but his voice was quiet, almost cold. "And what does that mean for you?" "It means freedom," she said, swallowing hard. "It means I can walk away from all of this. From the pressure, from the emptiness, from the grief I don't know how to carry anymore." She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "I can just walk away, and I should. But I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm strong enough to make that choice." Daniel didn't move. He stood still, watching her as though he were seeing her for the first time. Then he finally spoke, his voice laced with a quiet sorrow. "You think walking away will fix it? You think running from it will make the pain go away?" Evelyn flinched. The words hit her harder than she expected. But they weren't wrong. She'd spent her whole life running. From loss, from guilt, from the life she couldn't seem to handle. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "But I'm tired. I'm so tired, Daniel. And I don't know what else to do." There was a long pause. Lila's laughter faded as she moved off toward the woods, the puppy trailing behind her. Evelyn's heart ached at the sound of it, a painful reminder of how much she had lost, and how much she still didn't understand. "I'm sorry," Daniel said softly, his words almost a whisper. "I don't have the answers. I don't have the solutions. But I know this. Running won't bring you peace." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I don't want to hurt anymore," she said, the words escaping her before she could stop them. "I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't know how to fix it." "Maybe you're not supposed to fix it," Daniel said, taking a small step toward her. "Maybe you're just supposed to live with it." The words hit her like a slap, raw and unrelenting. She recoiled, unsure of what to say next. The emotions swirling in her chest were too much, too overwhelming. She could feel the breaking point coming, the thing she had been avoiding for so long. "I'm sorry," she said again, tears threatening to spill over. I can't do this. I thought I could, but I can't." She turned quickly, her feet carrying her away from him, away from everything. Her heart was racing, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had to get away. She needed to run. But as she reached the edge of the cemetery, she stopped. Her eyes landed on a small patch of earth, just past the rows of graves. Amelia's grave. Evelyn's breath hitched as she stared at the headstone, the cold reality of her loss rushing over her like a tidal wave. She couldn't run. Not anymore. Daniel's voice came from behind her. "Evelyn," he said, his tone softer this time, "you're not alone in this. You don't have to do this by yourself. Evelyn's heart ached. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to fix the mess she had created. But in that moment, looking at Amelia's grave, looking at the life she could never go back to, she realized something. She didn't have to fix it all at once. She could start small. Start with the truth. She turned back to Daniel, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I don't know if I can face it, but I have to try. Daniel stepped forward, his hand reaching for hers. You don't have to do it alone, Evelyn. Not anymore. But even as the first threads of connection pulled them together, Evelyn knew they were just beginning to face the hardest part. The part where the past met the future, and the choices they made would shape everything that came after. The morning was colder than usual, the frost clinging to the grass like tiny diamonds that evaporated as soon as the sun touched them. Evelyn had arrived early at the cemetery, her hands shaking as she stepped out of her car. The weight of her decision, the one she had been avoiding for days, pressed down on her chest like a stone. Daniel hadn't called. He hadn't reached out, and neither had she. After their conversation the night before, everything felt unresolved. The silence between them felt heavy, like the space between two people who knew they were supposed to be more than strangers but didn't know how to bridge the gap. She walked slowly through the cemetery, the familiar path leading her past rows of graves. The soft crunch of the grass beneath her boots was the only sound, but it didn't soothe her as it once had. Today, the stillness only reminded her of how much she had lost, how much she was still losing. Evelyn stopped in front of Amelia's grave, her heart catching in her throat. She hadn't been able to visit here for so long. Every time she came, it felt like a reminder of all the mistakes she had made. The things she should have said. The things she should have done. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the crisp morning air. I'm so sorry, baby. Her tears were silent as they fell, soaking into the soft earth beneath her. It had been years since she'd allowed herself to grieve like this, to let the tears come without trying to hold them back. But it was too much today. The pressure had been building for so long that it finally broke her. Evelyn collapsed to her knees, her hands pressing against the stone, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The weight of everything she had carried alone was finally too much to bear. The guilt, the regret, the fear of never being enough for anyone, especially her daughter. Why didn't I protect you? She sobbed, her voice breaking. Why didn't I save you? She didn't hear him approach, didn't hear Daniel's footsteps until he was standing next to her, watching her with that quiet understanding he always seemed to have. You don't have to do this by yourself, he said, his voice low and steady. You've carried this pain for long enough. Evelyn wiped her eyes quickly, trying to hide the tears, but it was useless. Her pain was raw and exposed. There was no pretending anymore. I don't know how to let it go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to stop punishing myself. Daniel knelt down beside her, his presence solid and unyielding. You can't keep running from it. You can't keep pushing it away. You have to face it, not to fix it, but to heal. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. But what if facing it means I'll lose everything? What if I can't go back? What if I lose myself in the process? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. What if losing yourself means finding the person you were supposed to be? Evelyn's breath hitched. She wanted to pull away, wanted to retreat into the walls she had built around her heart. But his words made her feel exposed. The truth was, she was terrified of what might happen if she let go. Terrified of facing the things she had buried so deep. What if I fail? She whispered, her voice shaking. What if everything falls apart? Daniel met her gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. You won't fail. Not if you choose to fight for what matters. Not if you choose to fight for yourself. She swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. Could she really do this? Could she really face everything she had avoided for so long? Or was she too broken to fix? The silence stretched between them, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could be whole again. But the fear was suffocating. pulling her back into the darkness. Daniel didn't speak again, but his presence was enough. It was like he was waiting for her to make the choice, to take that step even if it felt impossible. Evelyn closed her eyes, taking a shaky breath. She could hear the distant sound of Lila laughing, playing near the edge of the cemetery. For a brief moment, it reminded her of the life she had once dreamed of, a life where she wasn't consumed by guilt, where she could be the mother she had always wanted to be. But could she get there? Could she find a way back to that version of herself? The truth was, she didn't know. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like it was worth trying. She had been running for so long, running from her own emotions, from the pain, from the past. But now, sitting here in the cemetery, with Daniel beside her and the weight of everything pressing down on her, Evelyn made a choice. "I'm ready," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm ready to try." Daniel's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt like she wasn't alone. She wasn't carrying the burden on her own anymore. There was a flicker of hope, small but real, that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way out of the darkness. They sat there together for a while in silence, as the world around them seemed to hold its breath. There was no magic solution, no quick fix. But in that quiet moment, Evelyn knew something had changed. She was no longer running, no longer hiding. She was finally ready to face what had been holding her back. And for the first time in years, the weight on her chest didn't feel quite so heavy. But even as Evelyn took that first step toward healing, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something that would test her in ways she couldn't yet understand. And the journey to find peace wasn't going to be easy. The sun had risen high by the time Evelyn stood up from Amelia's grave. She'd stayed there longer than she expected, the silence around her offering a strange comfort. The weight of her grief hadn't disappeared, but it didn't feel as suffocating anymore. For the first time in years, she could breathe a little easier. Daniel hadn't left her side. He had been there, quietly present, offering no solutions, no answers, just companionship. And somehow that had been enough. As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, the morning light filtering through the trees, Evelyn felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She hadn't solved everything. The pain wasn't gone, but she had faced it, and maybe that was the first step toward healing. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "I don't think I could have made it through this alone." Daniel glanced at her, offering a small, genuine smile. "You weren't alone. You just didn't see it yet." Evelyn smiled back, the corners of her mouth trembling as if her body was still learning to feel lighter. For so long, she had convinced herself she was too broken, too lost to find peace. But in that moment, with Daniel beside her, she felt a shift, a quiet acceptance that maybe she wasn't as lost as she thought. Maybe she could find her way forward. They reached the cemetery's gates, and Evelyn paused for a moment, looking back one last time at the rows of graves, at the place where she had buried so much of herself. Amelia was gone, but Evelyn was still here, and that, in itself, was a victory. "Do you think we'll ever be able to let go?" she asked, her voice distant, as if speaking more to herself than to Daniel. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the horizon, the morning light painting the world in soft hues of gold and orange. "I think you'll find that you never really let go," he said slowly. "But you learn to carry it with you, and one day, it won't hurt as much." Evelyn took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling over her like a blanket of understanding. Maybe that was the key. Maybe it wasn't about moving on or forgetting the past. Maybe it was about learning to live with it, to accept the scars, not as marks of weakness, but as proof that she had survived. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself sitting in her car, parked outside the small coffee shop in town. It was a cozy place, with warm lights glowing through the windows, a stark contrast to the cold reality she had lived in for so long. The same coffee shop she had passed countless times without a second thought. But today it felt different. Daniel had offered to take Lila for ice cream, a little break, a way to let the two of them have some time to themselves, and Evelyn had agreed. She needed the space, this time to reflect, to decide what came next. She sat in the car for a while, watching people go in and out, her thoughts swirling. She thought about the offer she had received, the one to sell her company. The deal that had promised to free her from the life she had built, but at the cost of everything that had defined her for so long. Her fingers hovered over the steering wheel, her mind racing. Should she take the offer? Would selling the company really give her the peace she was searching for? Or was it just another escape? Another way to avoid facing the life she had yet to fully embrace? And then, without even realizing it, her thoughts turned back to Daniel, to his quiet support, to the way he had stood by her when no one else had, to the way he had listened to her, even when she had nothing to give in return. She smiled to herself, a small, genuine smile that felt like the first one in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, the life she was searching for wasn't a thing to run away from. Maybe it was something she could build with the people who cared about her, with the people she could trust. Evelyn pushed the door open and stepped out of the car. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. As she walked toward the coffee shop, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her eyes catching the name on the screen. Corporate attorney. Final offer. The message was brief, but its weight was immediate. The deal had gone through. She had the chance to sign and walk away from the business she had spent her life building. The offer would set her up for life. A comfortable, secure future with no strings attached. But in that moment, Evelyn knew something had changed. She had been so focused on running, on escaping the pain, that she hadn't stopped to think about what really mattered, what she really wanted. She stood there in the parking lot, the phone in her hand, the cold air brushing against her skin. And then, with a deep breath, she tapped her phone screen, rejecting the offer. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the business. It was about living. It was about facing the grief. And it was about finding a way to move forward, not by escaping, but by embracing. The choice felt right. She didn't need the corporate world to define her anymore. She didn't need to run from the past to find peace. What she needed was the courage to step into the future, to build something new with the people who truly mattered. That evening, after Lila was in bed, Evelyn sat on the porch, watching the sunset. It was peaceful, quiet. There was a gentle breeze in the air, and the world felt still for a moment. She could hear the faint sound of laughter coming from the yard next door. Maybe it was Daniel and Lila. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The past hadn't been easy. The road ahead wouldn't be either. But she was no longer alone. Not in the way she had been before. Daniel had shown her that, and somehow together they would figure it out. But even as Evelyn sat there, lost in the quiet beauty of the evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning. There were still so many things they would have to face. But whatever came next, she was ready. And for the first time, she believed that love, even after all the heartache, could heal. Love could be the thing that pulled them forward, even through the hardest of times. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.